All right. Let's do this thing. It is now 2:50, and hopefully my sound is working. We're going to go to here. Okay, so this is a dry run of a talk that I have to give on Monday, which is actually for NCC Group. It's a private conference, so this is a keynote. And it's called Adding Value by Being Annoying. So I just felt like that was a good summation of what a lot of consulting companies, big and small, do, is and also what security researchers do. I think there's a lot of people who find security researchers just very annoying, and that's fine. That's fine. So this might be you, right? Like, so you might be either one of the people in this InfoSuck cartoon, which is either the kind of person who's writing vulnerability scanners that like have a lot of math that does solving and eventually like traces vulnerabilities through a program, or you might be the kind of person who's like using a dumb fuzzer or guessing a password and just getting lucky. So this talk is for both of you. It's especially for people who are in the consulting business, but if you're in the general security business or you do security policy or you want to understand these sorts of things from that perspective, then this talk is also for you. But as with any talk that's a keynote, we first have to establish our credentials as thought leaders. So the first thing we have is, of course, an OODA loop. And I always thought OODA loops were silly, just insane. It's like someone did a lot of LSD and then came up with this nonsense. I know that if you're in the military, you've kind of been brainwashed that this is a good way to think about how to make decisions. But it might be a good way if what you do is fly fighter jets. But I think if you don't fly fighter jets, then you probably should not be using an OODA loop. Likewise, you almost have to have a left of boom, right of boom slide. I think this is also a terrible and overly simplistic way to think about how to make security decisions. I don't ever want to say this or ever hear it again. This whole attacker only has to win once and we have to win every time nonsense. This one where we make fun of people's security efforts, I actually like this one, but I never want to see it again. Of course, it's not a security talk if you don't have a hacker in a hoodie trying to type code wearing gloves. I don't know how many of you have tried to type while wearing gloves. It is not as fun as you might think. Usually when I go to a data center, I used to just freeze my little hands off. That's just how it was. Oh, yeah, all of these hit big with the policy folk. I better not answer questions yet because I'm trying to time this thing. But, okay, so, look, it hits big with the policy folk because they have simplistic and terrible views of security. That's why it hits big. Anyway, so you have to have a Sun Tzu quote in order to be a thought leader in this space. And what I love about this one with the terracotta, like this terracotta warrior, is that Sun Tzu lived in like 500 BC, and the terracotta warriors were buried with an emperor in like 200 BC. And that's like 300 years of difference. That'd be like having a picture of, I don't know, me next to a quote from George Washington or something. It's just ridiculous, right? So anyway, I think that's really funny because we want to not just be seen as information security thought leaders, but we also want to be seen as military strategists. We also have to include Clausewitz. It doesn't have to have any correlation to, information security in any way, but you do have to pretend like you know him. You do have to have your survivor bias slide. We don't want to talk about observability bias, but we always have to talk about survivor bias for some reason. Labeling and mislabeling of vulnerabilities, that's a big deal. And then you have to have a ransomware and Bitcoin slide and really complain about Bitcoin as if you are in some way an environmental activist, which we all probably should be. But let's be honest, banks aren't exactly the least impactful thing on earth either. We don't really complain about their giant buildings, etc. So anyway, thought leadership established. Let's just say thought leadership established. Let's talk about me and who I am and why anyone would listen to me at a keynote for a large security company, where many other people are much smarter than me. And so this timeline is completely to scale. Sometime just shortly after the late Jurassic, I started doing security work. After that, Spark exploits became useful. I did a lot of work with Solaris. I did a lot of work with Data General Unix, True64, HPUX. I know PA Risk. I actually don't know ARM. I should probably take one of the many classes that are put out now on like basic ARM exploitation. I don't know anything about ARM. I remember a time before format strings were exploitable and after format strings had all been pretty much used up, except in the IoT market, where everything old is new again. And then, I remember when client sides were just a toy that I thought were really hilarious, or very special purpose devices for very special purpose targets, instead of the standard concept of operation that the entire world was going to run on. I clearly missed the boat on that. And I guess the thing here is there's a certain perspective that you get from being in the industry for 20 years. And one of those perspectives is really watching concepts of operation come and go, along with entire attack surfaces, entire platforms as they come and go. And so a lot of what you hear in this talk is related to that perspective. And from the standpoint of people who have run and operated security companies, there are things that we miss. Now, I will say, I think 98% of the problem in the information security community is on the defensive side. They're really busy whining about offensive security tools. And the reason for that is they just don't want people to know how bad their own defensives work. So 98% of the problem is entirely on the defensive side of things. But 2% of the problem is on the offensive side, on the research side, on the assessment side. So some of that is, why are we not able to predict new concepts of operation that people are starting to use for our clients? And not just predict it, but also communicate it, change their behavior, protect them. And part of that is that we are not modeling our adversaries' innovation. Turla is one of the most innovative businesses in the market, and we are not properly modeling that, or when we can model that, we are not properly getting the message across. And it sort of says something about the entire community when APTs don't have to innovate. That's a problem that the community has. And we've seen this kind of change in bug classes and their importance over time. And we haven't really measured that delta. We haven't been able to explain to the wider world that, yes, buffer overflows are still a thing, but they're less important right now than SQLI. Oh, wait, now cross-site scripting is really important and is, in fact, not just available and there's a million vulnerabilities, but these vulnerabilities have become high impact, have been able to be used to penetrate organizations and cause harm. Oh, wait, now it's all the XML entity injection. Oh, wait, now it's all deserialization. Oh, hold up a minute. Now SSRF is important, right? So this progress, this movement through bug classes, through concepts of operations, is not something we've been able to communicate to our clients as well as we could have, in a way that let them know that the defenses they'd invested in were even more useless than they thought they were, right? So I was one of those who was like, SSRF, that's cute. What a cute thing to get a black hat talk on. I'm sure that'll come in handy someday. I did not think, a short period of time later, that that's what would be getting the world owned, right? So how do we communicate that level of change, that delta, or a delta of a delta, to our clients and to the wider community? And I think one of the things we've been doing wrong is we've been understating the value of new bug classes. So the results of that, we failed at communicating as an industry that patching is not the answer, right? So this is the perfect example. Already SolarWinds is so far in the rear view mirror that we can't even see it from here, right? So Exchange is about to get in the rearview mirror. Now we have to worry about yet another wave of big, HTTP networking devices being owned, and then the result of that, like we haven't really been able to communicate what is the problem when you have like an F5 owned. What is the actual impact on an organization? What is your fix? Your fix is not to patch it, right? That is something we have completely failed as a community to communicate. And let's examine patching briefly. It fits every part of a software vendor's model. It allows them to get recurring revenue for support. It allows them to do really good PR and prevent really bad PR. And it fits their development models and their testing models. But it 100% does not fit our customer security models. It does not help the customer, right? So that's not a good thing, right? And as part of the reason that is still an accepted, okay situation is that we have failed at communicating the value of our research and of the researchers that we have to government and policy sectors, right? So the government and the policy, like even when the head of like the United States National Security Council is out there saying you need to patch your servers, he is advocating a position that doesn't help anybody. And it clearly did not help anybody. But why is he doing that? Because we have not succeeded at doing what we should do in communicating what we need to communicate. And this is another example. We've heard about SolarWinds. We've heard about Exchange. You did not hear a single thing from the government or even the UK government, any government, about the North Koreans targeting individuals in the security community, because they do not think it's a community worth solving. If this had been the nuclear science community, you would definitely have heard about it. And the other example of that is that when, for example, China focuses, perhaps, we don't know the truth yet, on hacking consulting companies and getting value out of that and leveraging that to make global impact, no one is like, oh, we should protect these people. It's important to negotiate that these people are protected in whatever country they're in. So these are some I start with the bad stuff in these talks. But I'm going to continue with bad stuff because we know kind of what's wrong. We know that all of our metrics are broken. In 20 years, we've made no progress in security metrics. It's just astonishing to me. We have this complete garbage fire of a metric. We all know that like 9.8 and 10 should be the same thing. Why is every remote bug a 9.8? It's just ridiculous, right? We know the thing's broken under the covers. For some reason, we're still using it. We're still pretending it does something, right? So why is that? Even if I wanted to give a company a metric for how valuable a security operational tool was, like a WAF, for example, right? So let's look at what she says, because we're like, hey, what's a good one? She's like, well, I want to focus on how many systems are protected, so percent protected instead of postmortems. Like these things, first of all, those aren't metrics. Those are hard to come up with. But I don't know what a good WAF metric would be. I got to be honest. One metric I enjoy is how many new classes of vulnerabilities does a WAF introduce to my environment? Because we know they do. Like, so this is a funny thing about like, we haven't been able to communicate that when you're adding these security products, you might not be so much removing exposure as just shifting the exposure into another area that you have no way to control. And that's something that we probably shouldn't put up with for too much longer if we want to have any kind of level of security for our clients. So I think this was some great work on, I believe this was Bishop Fox, on JSON, essentially desynchronization, right? So when you add a WAF, you get HTTP desynchronization. When you add JSON parsers all over the place, you get JSON desynchronization. These are tricky to knock down. They're very interesting, but we have not communicated the higher order information, the like meta-analysis to our clients of what are the exposures you're about to add? How does this really help you? And I think this is one of the reasons why is because if you've been in consulting, in security consulting, you have run into a weird equities decision. On one hand, you can spend some time communicating strategic risk to your client. So you're writing a document that has analysis and discussion and is figuring out how the business risk is involved. And then on the other hand, they're going to say, look, what we really need is the list of like almost an XML document of our vulnerabilities that we can import into our ticketing system so we can take care of it. So that's the other side of the story. And you can't have both. And I don't think we've communicated the value of the strategic risk part of this. So I'd like us as an industry to find out, how do we get from we don't want to be the roadblock in the business unit to please, for the love of Zeus, stop buying broken enterprise security devices. And I have some ideas. So we're not coming at this completely blank. These might be terrible ideas. But I think if a product had an RCE, like our F5 listed above, then you should just make a rule that it can't be exposed for a year afterwards. Just not exposed in a way that it would be vulnerable. That means you got to put something in front of it or you got to take it out, right? And then I also think that a large segment, I try to communicate this to executives, right? I say, look, anything that a large segment of your enterprise authenticates to, you have to treat as if it's going to be domain admin, which it will be. And anything that's a domain admin, you kind of have to treat as an existential threat. And what I've sort of come to realize is that we always do data flow diagrams, but we very rarely do information flow diagrams, which is a completely different style of thing. So let's come to the theme of this talk, which is that the worthless things of today are not the worthless things of tomorrow. That is something that I've definitely seen over and over, because there's a lot of stuff that's underutilized. One of the things that's really underutilized is tooling. And there's so much, not just greatness, but commoditized greatness, right? Like stuff that was impossible to do 5 years ago and now is just free. One of these things is like all sorts of code analysis tools are now essentially free, right? Like anything where you want to do a taint and then a sync, all that stuff, you can get it from a million different places. And these, of course, obviously, GitHub's going to charge you for this one, but there's a million more of these. There's 3 different decompilers on the market right now, all of them very good. And this doesn't even include the one in Anger, right? So, if you want to do a lot of binary analysis and automated assessment, you do BinNavi. If you want to, have the free version that I think is actually quite good, you can use Ghidra, or you can, of course, always go back to old IDA Pro if you need something familiar to the most number of people in the business. So that's an amazing thing. And the new debuggers that are coming out, this is Tetrain Revin, and Tetrain Revin is really good. This is not something that I could have imagined we would have had available to every researcher 5 years ago. Fuzzing has made massive advances. There's more fuzzing tools out there now than people using fuzzing tools, as far as I can tell. Here's one. I've literally never seen anyone use it, but it's amazing, right? So, and it does things differently. The trick with picking a fuzzer is picking a different fuzzer from everybody else. Here's one that just came out last week, and it's insanely fast because it uses a hardware acceleration on top of Hong Fuzz. Super good. Spelled Hong Fuzz wrong on this page. I haven't told them yet. Annoying to those of us with OCD. Anyway, so how, as an assessment company, do we produce results that are way above our size? How do we hit above our size? And the easiest way I've always found is just follow Tyrannado around, and James Forshaw, that is, and just take what he's doing and take it one step further. And you can do this with a number of researchers. But if you're slightly lazy like me, you don't want to have to like explore a whole new space. There's so much space left over in each of his blog posts where you can just like look at a new OS that he hasn't looked at, or add a new, literally one function, and you'll find like a whole bunch more bugs. If you remember, there was a particular researcher that was dropping Ode on Twitter all last year, and this is what she did. Was just look at some of the things that he had found, used his tools, found a bunch more bugs, wrote them up, LPEs everywhere, right? Really good stuff. That's a good way to do it. And I think people look at conference talks wrong. It's really surprised me, because I don't don't watch conference talks the same way a lot of people do. I don't feel like I need to be spoon-fed information. I treat them, essentially all of them, as if they are signals intelligence stolen from SVR headquarters. And because I often talk to the researchers afterwards, I know that they've left out all the really sensitive bits, right? Like even in this talk, I'm leaving out the really sensitive bits. That's just how all conference talks are. I feel like people think of them as entertainment. And an easy way to find out what's missing from a talk is just to ask yourself how you would continue the efforts in that talk that they didn't bother to find or didn't bother to tell you about, right? A lot of the code has been anonymized, but it's real bugs. So I think that's one of the easiest ways. And then one of the mindset changes that I've had to convince people into while doing consulting is that consulting is not what you do so you can make money so you can then do vulnerability research. Consulting is vulnerability research. There's no easy way to get your hands on some of these giant enterprise things installed in a real world environment. I think of it as like biology or ethnology. I think there's another word for it, where you actually go out into the wild and you look at animals and how they behave in the wild, as opposed to studying rats in a cage. It turns out rats in a cage don't behave at all like rats. They just don't. So a lot of the experiments we did on rats were actually like not really valid when you then went and investigated populations of rats in the wild, which is an entire different philosophy of how you're supposed to study things. So it's important to understand that consulting itself is research, and that you need to take the consultants you have specializing in like the financial vertical and have them talk a lot more with the people you have in the healthcare vertical and the defense vertical, for example, because that stuff does come around. Okay, so I want to give you an example of what I feel like if you're like, oh, what would be the next concept of operation? The next bug class. The next, not bug class is almost too small a term. The next set of bug classes, shall we say. And I think one thing that we've thrown out forever are resource exhaustion bugs, right? So like when I do a fuzzer, or I'm running a big fuzz farm, like if I have files, they're going into Word, and then if Word takes longer than 10 seconds to open the file, I just kill the VM and restart the VM and next file, right? That's just something, it's not interesting. It didn't crash Word. So I got to thinking about this because Thomas Dulian, otherwise known as Halvar Flake, in my head, he's only known as Halvar Flake, and then he changed his name back to his real name, and it just is confusing my brain forever. But he has a new company called Optimize. And the idea is to minimize the costs of your cloud application, because if you think of a cloud computer as the only kind of computer, then every application will soon be a cloud application, if that makes sense. And the idea is minimize it in a number of different ways. You got to minimize data transfer. You got to minimize how much CPU you're using, how much memory you're using, all the different aspects that go into running that application, you have to minimize. So the essential other side of this story is that Cyber Command, for example, wants to impose tailored non-kinetic costs on adversaries. Well, what could be more costly than money, right? Like if I could tell you that it's going to cost the Internet Research Agency 5 times as much to do their propaganda pushing than they are paying right now, is that worth investigating? And I think it really is. And the reason that I think this comes together is because in the security world, we do a lot of work on mutation. Everything, you create something and then someone's putting a signature check there, so you're mutating, right? Like that's a standard way to do it. And we don't put as much work on synchronization. So this is a cicada. It looks like it's a brood cicada. It's not an annual cicada. You can tell from the colors. But they come up every 17 years, and Brood X is coming up this year, and they all come up at once, and there's something called predator satiation. So like they don't have any defenses, but there's no predator that can eat all of them, right? So enough of them survive that we're still just covered in cicadas, which is Perry's worst nightmare. But synchronization is a huge, it's a huge force multiplier if you can find a way to do that. We're just starting to figure out how cicadas do synchronization. And you've seen attackers do a little bit of this, right? DDoS pulses, which were not really synchronized. They were really more just target manipulation. This is actually an NCC Group talk on doing non-volumetric DDoS. He's like, well, you know, it's weird. We don't really focus enough on exhausting other things other than bandwidth, which is true. And here's something that came out, a couple papers that were really good on doing hash collision attacks, right? So this is a subset of what we would call pathological input attacks, which are where you create input that is going to take the worst possible performance hit against an algorithm that on average has very good performance. And quicksort is the obvious example. There's plenty. Quicksort has like very fast, I think it's logarithmic almost, operation against standard normal random data, but you can pick the data that would give it just horribly exponential sorting performance. And that's something that has been a little bit automated. So Fuzz was one of the things that came out where they're like, we're going to automatically generate pathological inputs. But the question you have to ask yourself is, why? Why would you want to do that? And there's some very good reasons. So the idea is to create concepts of operation that are what you're going to want in the future. And one of those is finding times when your adversary has decided to take the limits off their budgeting. And therefore, you know, when you expand the workload that they're under in ways that are not destructive, that they're going to pay for it, right? We're going to exhaust the money that our adversaries have to operate against us. Very simple. If they're running like a social media network, we're just going to create users that just send large video files back and forth to each other that are really hard to encode and decode. We're going to find JPEG files that take a long time to convert to PNG files, and we're going to send that over there and ask them to convert them for us and vice versa. So all of this stuff, there's an entire class of algorithmic attacks we're going to start doing, and we're going to leverage it in a very real way in, within 5 years. That's the plan. So that brings me to the next stage, which is a call to arms, really. This is one thing that I noticed, and I've been having a problem with this for a long time, which is that in the UK, the computer security research community does not have the kind of sway or voice in policy creation that it should, right? So Shashank Joshi is actually a writer for The Economist, which is a extremely popular, powerful, it's not a newspaper, it's really a magazine, but it's a weekly magazine based in the UK. And he's like, well, I mean, we need to create a cyber sector, says the UK. I'm like, you guys currently have the world's largest computer security consulting firm. So that's very weird to me, right? But that's not a rare thing. NCC Group does one research post every other day on average, and it kind of boggles my mind that they're not like the go-to policy team as well for the UK. And the reason I don't think they are is because the UK's policy on this sort of thing has been just bananas for a while. It's just like extremely tightly controlled, but also not technically accurate, right? And what we really do need from these groups is a filter function that enforces technical accuracy on the policy teams. This is just an example. I don't know what in particular they're evoking here, but they're definitely going the wrong way, shall we say. And so in the United States, there's something called the ISTAC, the Information Systems Technical Advisory Committee, but actually there's 1 million of these committees. And what you'll see is that after about 2013, a lot of information security professionals and researchers started getting really involved with all of these government committees and offering their time to the State Department, offering their time to the Commerce Department, the Defense Department, and all these government places started reaching out, right? So the US government is extremely sort of integrated now, right? Like the people who are doing the policy on the National Security Council are also the people calling, and they have you on their signal list, right? So that's a completely different set of understandings. We really need that not just in the UK, but across the world. I've written up a couple policy bingo sheets to help get people into this world so they know what to expect, because there are a ton of bad ideas, and they're all the same bad ideas, and you're going to hear it all the way. So I highly recommend. These are both public. They're on Twitter, but you can go through and we can talk about each and every one of these things and why they're a bad idea. And also, I've put together some what I consider different ideas that are very hard. So I think it's worth doing in each country, right? Like, what are the ideas and policy things in the UK and in Europe that would make a better difference but be more technically accurate? How could these things really work, right? So in the States, I think it would be easy to say we need to coalesce analytic capability somewhere in CISA or somewhere in government. We haven't been able to do that yet, which is why you see CISA using the names of like 6 different consulting companies. Like, they're like Fancy Bear, APT 53, Helium or whatever, right? So like, they have this huge list of things. The grouping's all off. No one can normalize this stuff. It's apparently an impossible to solve problem. We need to figure out a way to solve it. So that's the call to arms. I'd really like everyone to get, we can do one paper every other day in research. We should be doing one paper a month at least in policy, please. And so that brings me to my last set of call to arms, essentially, which is when you're doing security consulting, you are in the discipline of looking for unnoticed things. That is the surprises that live all amongst us. There was a time when actually 2 things happened. One, we found out that horseshoe crabs are actually just spiders that live underwater, which I think is amazing, like all this time. And that birds are dinosaurs. There was a time that I did not know, and I think a lot of people did not know, that birds are not just related to dinosaurs, but in fact are actual dinosaurs. And in retrospect, these things are obvious, just as the spider in the center of the screen in retrospect is very obvious. And what I've learned is that people really do have a longer growth period than you think. It might be 17 years before someone that you don't think is contributing technical value really can take a world-class research lead on some of this. And so I think knowing that people can change, knowing that organizations can change for the better is something that we have to keep in mind at all times. It's getting so much harder to mentor starter people, right? Like initial entry people who maybe have just gotten into the gigs. Maybe people who were not even technical. If you're not sitting next to them, it's hard for them to wander over and say, hey, what is it you're working on? And we're about to move into a world where nobody's sitting next to anybody, even after COVID's over. I think that's something that we really have to find a new way of doing mentorship. So I hope that NCC Group has really thought about this. I know that I'm thinking about how to do this a little bit better as well. And that's really the end of this. This is the future. It ends with hope. It starts with sadness. And I want to thank everybody here for listening and to my dry run. And of course, if you have comments, please let me know. Although I do have to give it on Monday. But thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.